Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Max Scheler is going to elaborate a very important set of distinctions between what he's going to call the ancient, and by that he means pre-Christian conception of love, which we are mostly finding in Greek sources, but also in Roman sources, and then the Christian conception of love, which he takes as being radically different, as a sort of advance over that. So what does he actually have to say about the culture of Greco-Roman antiquity? He's going to tell us the Greek and Roman philosophers and poets have expressed the significance and value of love and ancient morality with admirable clarity, and then he says, I'm going to give you a brief summary without reference to specific sources. Of course, he is going to give you some specific sources, for example, Plato and Aristotle, but we'll come to those in just a moment. And then he says that's going to be enough. And the first thing that he wants to point out is that love is not the highest, the best, the most interesting matter for these ancient Greek and Roman philosophers and poets. He says, logical form, law, justice, and what do these have in common? The element of measure and equality in the distribution of goods and evils. These are superior to love. Why? Well, because in some respects they are more universal. They are more at the heart of what is felt to really matter. So he says, even though Plato in the Symposium establishes great differences in values between the various kinds of love, and he does this through his interlocutors, we could think, for example, about the second speech in which Pausanias is going to distinguish between an earthly and a heavenly Aphrodite, all the way to Socrates' recounting of Diotima's teachings, where there's an entire ladder of loves by which we can ascend to, the best thing in, not even in the universe, beyond being, that is the form of beauty itself, the form of the good. So why is this the case? Well, because love, as he says, is viewed as belonging to the domain of the senses. It's a form of desire, of need, which is foreign to the most perfect kind of being. And he says this is the natural corollary of the extremely questionable ancient division of human nature into two main areas. Reason, on the one hand, best, highest, and sensuality, not so good, lower, right? Something that we don't want to fall into. He says into a part that is formative and a part that is formed. So love is going to be necessarily something that is lower. And he's going to talk about this just a little bit later after bringing in Christian views. He says that all ancient philosophers, poets, now he brings in a third class, and moralists agree that love is a kind of striving, an aspiration. So love doesn't have all that it is looking for. It is not operating, you could say, out of a fullness and abundance, and this is what he's going to say about Christianity. Instead, it is a lack that promotes this striving, this desire, this movement towards. And he gives a number of different things that it can be movement towards in this respect. Lower towards the higher, the unformed towards the formed. He uses some Greek terms, the meion, that is that which does not have being or does not fully have being, towards the on, the existing. Appearance towards essence, ignorance towards knowledge. And then we get to one that's a little bit less pejorative, but still just a mean between fullness, so it's not fullness, fullness and privation, which is coming out of the symposium as well. And the symposium here, I should mention, is being treated as if it's, in some respects, the best that ancient philosophy and poetry has to offer by comparison to the following Christian morality. He's going to go on and say that in all human love relationships, such as marriage or friendship, a distinction must be made between a lover and a beloved. Now, why? Because there's a distinction in quality that is inherent in this, with one exception that he's going to talk about in a footnote. The beloved, the object of love, is nobler, better, right? More beautiful, more perfect, more fulfilled than the beloved. So he goes on and says the beloved is the model for the lovers being willing and acting. And he says this conception, which grew from the relations of life in antiquity, finds its clearest expression in the numerous forms of Greek metaphysics. And who's he going to bring up? Plato and Aristotle. Now, he's already talked about Plato to some degree, and we do want to point out the one exception to this. So this is in a footnote. He says the terminology is different only in the case of an erotic attachment of a man to a boy. Then the philomenos, the beloved, is younger and less perfect. The erastes, older and more perfect. But even here, there's an inequality of values between the two. Right? So that seems like an exception, but it's not really an exception. So what are Plato and Aristotle going to teach us here? Plato, he says, we would not love if we were gods. If we were gods, we wouldn't have lack, and therefore we wouldn't need to love. We would already have everything we need. The most perfect form of being cannot know aspiration or need. Love is only a road to something else, a methodos, a journey, a destination, seeking, we could say. And then he says, according to Aristotle, in all things there is rooted an upward urge. Oregesthai is one term for it, coming from erexis, and ephiesthai, towards the deity, the nous, the self-sufficient thinker who moves the world as prime mover. He doesn't move it as a being whose will and activity is directed towards the outside, but as the beloved moves the lover, as if it were attracting, enticing, and tempting it. So he says, in this idea, and he's going to say something good about this here, in this idea with its unique sublimity, beauty, and ancient coolness, the essence of the ancient conception of love is raised into the absolute and boundless. This transforms the entire viewpoint on the universe. It's a great chain of dynamic spiritual entities, of forms of being ranging from the prima materia, the prime matter, up to human being, a chain in which the lover always strives for and is attracted by the higher, which never turns back, but aspires upward in its own turn. So chasing after better and better beings. He says the process continues up to the deity, the highest point, which itself does not love, but represents the eternally unmoving and unifying goal of these aspirations of love. So a very coherent picture of how love works and what love actually is. At the very top, no love, but everything is loving on its way up, you could say, right? And then he's going to bring up a connection between what he calls the ancient idea of love and the principle of the agon. Now, agon means contest. It's the word, by the way, that we get agony from, right? And it's a contest to win something. And this was incredibly important within ancient Greek society, which was a very competitive-oriented society. So he says, they were driven by the ambitious contest for the goal, dominating Greek life in all of its aspects, from the gymnasium and the games, so physical things, to dialectics and the political life of Greek city-states. So how does this play itself out? Even the objects try to surpass each other in a race for victory in a cosmic agon for the deity. The prize that will crown the winner is extreme participation in the essence, knowledge, and abundance of being. This means that love is only the dynamic principle immanent in the universe, which sets in motion this great agon of all things for the deity. So love is something important, but only important because of where it is going, what it reveals to us when we truly understand what love is about from this perspective. He does say one other thing that I think is really quite important to highlight a little bit later on in the third part. He tells us that in the ancient notion of love, there is an element of anxiety. Now, isn't that an interesting thing to say? Why would that be the case? Because the higher up you are, the more you can fall. The noble fears the descent to the less noble, is afraid of being infected and pulled down. And here, Scheler is going to say something really interesting by way of comparison. The sage, the wise person, the sort of ideal human being of antiquity doesn't have the same firmness, the same inner certainty of himself and his own value as the genius and hero of Christian love. So, from the perspective of the ancients prior to Christianity, they could say, well, this is as good as it gets. This is all there is. Once Christianity enters onto the scene and is engaging with ancient culture, sort of on its own ground, there's a lack that is being revealed even in the ideal of the wise person, according to Max Scheler. If they were to love, they have to worry about declining in some way, whereas for Christianity, love is going to be absolutely central, and you could say trump these other principles. So this is his summary of the ancient pre-Christian, largely Greek in his examples, but also Roman culture views on love.